Hey, what's up, everyone? What's up? What's up? What is going on? I was just watching some lives and oh my God, like half of the lives are people talking about vaccines. I don't know, am I the only one that is really bored hearing people talking about vaccines? You know, you got a guy with the flag behind him complaining about vaccines. You have, like, I'll debate whatever as long as you start in reality. Yeah, I love starting reality. It's just, unbelievable. You look like Rogelio Mori that plays sometimes for Mexico. Really? Rogelio Mori, I got to look at him. I got to check him out. You are a liberal! That's funny. Okay. I'm not a liberal, but I can understand why you feel that way. How are you doing today, Lumdiful, by the way? How's everything? I am doing okay. If you say I'm a liberal, I think you don't like liberals. I don't dislike liberals. I just disagree with liberals. Are we leftist or conservative? Got to check. I'm a leftist. Oh, thank you for the follow. Yeah, these lives, it's just unbelievable. And it's like, this one guy I was watching. Oh, here we go. Well, let me finish my thought and then I'll let you in. It's so funny. I really don't want to talk about vaccines, and I'm just going to mention it for one moment. I feel like there's a lot of, what is the word? These guys have a lot of potential in their criticism of the state, of state power, of propaganda, of the pharmaceutical industry, of the media, in their distrust of all these different institutions. For the first time, I'm seeing conservatives, but what the connection that they don't make is that this is a profit-driven industry that cares nothing but profit for the shareholder by any means necessary. And there's a lot of nuance in this discussion on whether people should be vaccinated, whether there should be mandates and all this stuff. But it's like they come so close to being opposed to capitalism and understanding what the big picture is here, but then they kind of come back to it and go back to. So hold on, let me see who we got here. We got one more red eyes, very scary.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, nice to meet you. I
Nice to
apologize in
meet you.
advance because I'm not an English native speaker, so I got a strong accent.
That's okay. Where are you from?
I'm from Argentina. I don't know if you ever
Oh,
heard of
okay.
that country.
If
So,
I've ever what?
have you ever heard of that country?
Uh, have you spoken to Americans that have never heard of Argentina?
Tons of them.
Well, unfortunately for me, I am a little bit, I don't want to say, I have a little bit more education than maybe some Americans. I've heard of Argentina. On my mother's side of the family,
Your mother's side of the family.
are from the Dominican Republic and
Oh,
Puerto
nice,
Rico. So
nice.
I'm pretty familiar with Latin America, Latin American history, and even some history of Argentina.
That's really cool. That's really cool. Yes, people do know here in the United States. I live in Kansas. A lot of people here know Messi or
Kansas,
Maradona. Yes,
of
I live in
course,
Kansas.
Maradona.
Mm-hmm. The best player in the
Yeah,
world. Well, actually, Messi's a better
yeah,
player. Well, I wanted to debate you a little bit in a respectful way, of course. So, are
of
you a
course.
liberal, a Republican? Can you define yourself?
No, I'm
Libertarian,
a socialist.
a socialist? Oh, that's great.
Socialist.
This is really interesting because I'm an anarcho-capitalist actually. So we are in
Oh,
the
okay.
opposite way of the aisle, but I will a
Sure,
hundred
sure.
percent respect you. So here's my question. Um, it is almost impossible to get Republicans and Democrats and anarcho-capitalists like me and socialists like you to agree. So here's my proposal. Why don't we agree to disagree? What are your thoughts on secession? For example, California becoming its own country, Texas becoming its
Hmm.
own country, and why not even a county? For example, you got Austin, Texas, that is pretty liberal, but Texas is not liberal. Why not Austin becoming its own independent country, or maybe being a jurisdiction that is part of California? I mean, dividing and not having a central
Hmm.
government telling
An
you what to
autonomous
do.
region?
Exactly. That way, the socialists win because the only thing stopping several jurisdictions from adopting more socialist ideas is the federal government. And at the same time, the thing stopping people like me from having more free markets is again the same enemy that we have in common, the federal government. So why don't we agree to disagree and we just separate the one from another?
Yeah, I've thought about that before. I've thought about the Civil War. I don't know how knowledgeable you are of the United States Civil War that happened where the South seceded from the North. And I've thought before about what if they actually let them go. I know that the South had
Mhm.
mainly agriculture, the North had manufacturing, and the North didn't want to lose its agricultural base, and that's why it fought to hold on to it. But I feel that there are times that if the South was able to secede and they were able to keep their white ethno state,
Mhm.
and that would have been very unfortunate for the enslaved population. But
Yes.
the North would have been able to have much more freedom to create a much more fair and egalitarian state than they are now, with the South still at this time having the poorest states receiving more federal funding than they provide to the federal government. And I
Mhm.
think that the North would have been kind of like Canada, a little bit more social democratic.
Yes, I
Um,
agree.
yeah. Um, See, my thing is that the United States is such a huge country, and
It's
when
like
you
the
look at
European
Europe,
Union.
yeah, it's like the size of the European Union. And the benefit that the European Union has in a lot of these countries, you drive 2 hours this way, you're in one country. You drive 2 hours that way, you're in another country. People are able to experience different cultures, different languages, different ways of thought. When you're in the United States, you go this way, you're in Kansas, you go that way, you're in Kansas, and there's a very monolithic type of thought. Um,
Mhm.
And the Overton window is so small here that it's really, you're either liberal or conservative. And if you're liberal, you're thought of as a leftist, and they call the Democrats and they call liberals socialists. And that couldn't be any farther from the truth. I think you know, even though you're an anarcho-capitalist, there's nothing socialist or communist about the Democratic Party. It's a neoliberal capitalist right-wing party. So
In
to,
several
to, to
aspects,
kind of
you're right.
Yeah, so to kind of boil it down, I think that that might be a positive thing if the United States was broken down. I've heard one person say that at some point, one of the states or one of the regions of the country will get it right and really create a strong economy and a system that
Hmm.
works for everybody. And they will say, we don't want to be part of the rest of this country that
Yes.
is just bringing everybody down.
And here's
So
the thing.
I,
I have arguments with other libertarians and anarcho-capitalists, and we talk a lot about the non-aggression principle and all these things that I'm sure you are familiar with. And
I
we are like,
am.
yeah, socialism is so immoral. But at the same time, I'm like, what's wrong with having a population of people who are okay with socialism and they are willing to pay for it? They are willing to support it and try it. Who are we to stop them from doing that? Me as an
Right.
anarcho-capitalist, I have to respect your wishes. Now,
Hmm.
the only thing I ask for is that you respect my wishes too. So that's when we agree to disagree, and we can go to a system similar to Europe. And like me being an anarcho-capitalist doesn't mean that I want the state to disappear
Hmm.
tomorrow. I know that's impossible. I want more
Right.
competition of states. So maybe
Hmm.
you're right. Socialism is better. Let's try it. Let's have a jurisdiction becoming
Sure.
fully socialist and being 100% independent. And maybe I'm right, and maybe
Hmm.
free markets work, and let's try it. So, in your opinion, should Americans consider this more seriously? Should this become a thing?
It should be a topic of discussion, definitely. But as we stand now, there is
Mm-hmm.
no place. Cuba in 2019 wrote from the local level a new constitution that was ratified all the way up to the national level and then voted on. Okay. But that is a highly educated society that at the local level got together to do that. The United States, with our educational system, with our culture the way it is now, is in at this time is in no place to do anything like that. You would have different countries now that really don't differ very much economically, but in culturally, I think they would. But you would have different colors of neoliberal policies. So
And
I
that's
think
okay.
uh, it's not okay because we would still have mainly free market. We would have exploitation. We would have a culture of that would support a
Yes,
ruling
yes, but
capitalist class
if you make
instead
it
of the people.
okay, if you make it okay to talk about secession, the chances of you creating a jurisdiction where truly socialist people who really believe
Hmm.
in socialism, and they are, I don't know, three-quarters of the population, for example,
Right,
become really realistic. So if we
right,
are, let's be honest, I'm not gonna win, you're not gonna win. United States is not gonna become an NCAP paradise, and it's not gonna become a socialist paradise tomorrow. So the best second option is to start creating more options. And you're right, you're gonna
sure.
have a lot of neoliberal states that used to be states, like Texas or whatever. But the chances
Hmm.
of coming up with a socialist state, or at least something really close to that, increase a lot. So you win and
Sure.
I win. So in my opinion, we should both kind of fight together to
Yeah.
agree to disagree.
I have another question for you.
Yes.
Coming from Latin America, I think you know this all too well. Why, what is the history of US imperialism in Latin America? There have been almost every country in Latin America
Yes.
has tried to become socialist and has tried to do it democratically through reforms, through
Mm-hmm.
the electoral process. And when a country tries to become socialist, they immediately become invaded.
Mm-hmm.
They go under economic sanctions. The United States will fund death squads. Look what the
Yes, that's
United
true.
States did to Vietnam. They poisoned the water and food of the Vietnamese
Mm-hmm.
people. So, in one hand, they're
Yes,
saying, we want to free you, but we're going to poison your food and water. And to this day, Vietnam has
I
some of the
don't believe
highest
that's
birth
speech at all.
defects. What's
Yes,
that?
that it's an excellent question, and I don't believe that's
Yeah.
speech at
So,
all. I mean, people. Mhm. What is the
let me just
question?
say this one more thing. So, yeah, the two ideologies are based on different principles, where
Yes.
capitalism requires infinite growth. Okay, so in a capitalist system, infinite growth is the main requirement. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and in socialism, infinite growth, economic growth is not the goal. The goal is to meet people's basic needs and to
Mm-hmm.
create a society based on mutual ownership. So if you have a
Yes.
capitalist system and a socialist system, the capitalism at some point is going to say that socialist country has resources that we need,
Mm-hmm.
and they have workers that we can use for cheap labor.
Yes.
So our shareholders are requiring a greater return on our investment. Where are we going to raise the stock price? Well, we
Mm-hmm.
need, and natural resources is the foundation for economic growth. They're sitting on lithium, they're sitting on copper, they're sitting on gold, they're sitting on
Yes.
oil. We're going to invade. And that's the problem with just saying we'll have the two countries, the two systems living side by side.
You're concerned that the capitalist one eventually will have to invade the other one because it's just expanding too much.
The capitalist system will invade because that's the nature
Mm-hmm.
of capitalism. A and B, that's what has happened throughout many, many years
Like
now.
like to Latin America, with the United States
Yeah.
expanding in other
Just
regions of
stick
the world.
with me. I'm just picking up something at the door. Stick with me.
Yes. It's an excellent question. So whenever you want, I'll answer. I'll give you my
Go
opinion.
on.
Well,
Yeah.
here's the thing. An anarcho-capitalist, or how Mises or Rothbard would describe it, is not like we defend a capitalist government. Okay? For us,
Mm-hmm.
capitalism is nothing but the free exchange of goods and services and private titles. Basically, you own something and it's yours and only yours, and you willingly give it to me in exchange for something.
Right.
That's everything that capitalism is. So under that definition, if the United States government decides to, for example, attack Argentina because Argentina is deciding to become socialist and the United States government doesn't want that, first of all, we have to answer this key question: is whatever the United States government does something capitalist? Well, not really, because the resources that the United States government has, they got those resources through coercion. They didn't do free exchanges. The United States
Mm-hmm.
government takes resources against the will of the American people. They suck
Uh-huh.
resources from them, they accumulate them, and then they use those resources to attack other countries. So it's not capitalism at all. I mean, they have a monetary monopoly that is imposed. They
Mm-hmm.
have a secure monopoly, which is the military and other secure forces. So you have all
Okay.
these institutions that function on coercion, and they tax people. While you and me, we have to work to get our resources. We have to compete in the market. The United States
Mm-hmm.
government doesn't have to. They can say, no, 20% of your income is mine, and that's what they do. And then with that income, they go and, I don't know, attack some country that wants to become socialist. So in my opinion, I shall see two different collectivist institutions attacking each other. I don't see
Mm-hmm.
capitalism versus socialism. I see a more mild, richer type of socialism, which is the United States government, against another type of socialism, which could be a Latin American country. So that's what happened in Latin America. What you're telling me will be true if, for example, companies, through voluntary payments, through capitalist exchanges, decide to use their own resources to attack a socialist nation. That hasn't happened
Mm-hmm.
one single time in the world. That didn't happen, never. It was
What,
always
say this one more
one
time?
government attacking another government.
That has not happened?
As far as I know, a private company through voluntary exchanges and using their own resources and voluntary payments, hiring people, never attacked a socialist country in modern history, as far as I know.
What happened in 1957 Guatemala?
You tell me?
Jacobo Arbenz, most of Guatemala, the land was owned by the United Fruit Company.
Yes.
And the people were pretty much slaves of this company.
Okay.
And Jacobo Arbenz, the president, wanted to nationalize and take back the resources for the Guatemalan people. And just the threat of that, just discussing that,
yes,
the United Fruit Company spoke with the U.S. government, and the U.S. government acted for the interests of the company. And they invaded Guatemala. They bombed.
So it was the government using taxpayer money.
They carpet bombed Guatemala, and he was overthrown. Thankfully, he was not killed, which is what usually happens.
Yes.
But you see, we have to understand that the state is only a tool of the capitalist class. And that's why we don't have stateless capitalist societies. Because the state is a very useful tool of repression of
it's
the
what
worker.
We call crony capitalism.
Well, I know you guys call it crony capitalism, but we call it capitalism because the reason that we don't have a state is because the state is very useful. The state is necessary to decide property disputes, the laws that support the property owners and the people in power. So the United States has done that over and over and over again, especially in Latin America. I don't know if you're familiar with Operation Condor in the 1970s, but from 1970 to 1979, the United States murdered 60,000 innocent people. But they call that Operation Condor, but that really started in 1895 with the Spanish-American War and the taking over of Puerto Rico and Cuba. So, you know, I would say that would be nice, but capitalism requires a state to enforce its power inside the country and outside the country.
Well,
if we abolish the state, if we abolish the state, we would just the ruling class would create another state to enforce its power.
Okay, here there's two key points. Okay, number one, the example that you gave me was exactly what I'm complaining about. The U.S. government using coercion and taxpayer money to go and attack a socialist country. A private company caused the trigger, but they didn't attack. It was the U.S. government. That private company wouldn't have the resources. I mean, because here's the difference between a private company and the U.S. government attacking. If you decide, for example, go attack your neighbor, there's cost. You will have to buy a gun. You're taking a risk. There's a paycheck. You will lose a lot of money. It's the same with a private company. If the U.S. government goes and starts a war, there is no limit to the budget. They can just print money and fund themselves that way or raise taxes. So there is no limit. So that's number one. Number two is that a government is necessary to impose private property, just like you said. I don't agree with that. In my opinion, there is several private sector mechanisms to impose contracts and private property, but that is not the point. The point is that we agree that a government issues laws and regulations. And I love seeing laws and regulations as products. For example, like Apple issuing smartphones, creating smartphones. We all agree that smartphones wouldn't be as good if we would just have one company, just Apple making smartphones, no competition. What is their incentive to make good smartphones? Because there is tons of companies, they have to compete with each other, so they have to improve the quality and the price of their smartphones. I see laws and regulations the same way. If you have one single country, the planet Earth country, what is the incentive to have good laws and regulations to please their people? If there is no competition, people are not going to move to the another planet. So if you have two countries in the planet, the situation improves. We have hundreds of
Mm-hmm.
countries today, when in the past we just have huge kingdoms, like the Rome Empire. And today we have tons of countries, so they compete with each other, okay? And that way the laws improve. You're telling me that the United States government is attacking other countries, like if the problem is capitalism, but I see the problem as one central gigantic government with jurisdiction over millions of people and thousands of square kilometers. In my opinion, the United States government should be broken down. That way, crony capitalists who are just coward capitalists who don't want to compete in a free market and they want to use the government to just win, like Amazon, for example. Amazon is number one because they have the government on their side. Therefore, who can compete against Amazon? Nobody.
Mm-hmm.
So I see the problem here as the Central American government. That's the big problem, not the fact that
Mm-hmm.
we do free exchanges of goods and services, which is
Let me ask
capitalism.
you a question. In the free exchange of goods and services, what is the worker?
A worker. Here's the thing: in Austrian economics, I study Austrian economics. There is no differentiation between a worker and a businessman. Okay, they both manage resources, they take decisions, and they own their labor.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, for example, I clean houses, and we are making an agreement. I clean your house, you pay me, I manage my resources, my time, my hands, my talents. Those are my resources. And you might own a business and you're really successful. Those are your resources, your talents. There's no differentiation. So basically, a worker accumulates capital and he can, or she can, they
Mm-hmm.
can,
A
manage
worker
their
accumulates
capital.
capital, but in the exchange
Mhm.
of goods and services, the worker is one of the two, and the worker is actually a good. The worker is a commodity
That's
under
correct.
capitalism.
Yes,
Okay?
you as a
And
businessman, you're a commodity too. I'm a
yes.
consumer. Let's say that you are producing food because you own a restaurant. Okay, you're
Mm-hmm.
a commodity to me. I'm paying you to make food for me.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone is a
So the
commodity in
worker,
one
so
side
the
of the
worker
exchange.
becomes an object for the purpose of accumulating capital for the capitalist.
Just
Now,
like just like the businessman for the consumer. Everyone becomes an
so
object in that
but
sense, but it's a voluntary exchange.
it's not voluntary. And let me ask you one more question.
Mhm.
Uh, see, I'll say a couple things. See, you talk about Mises and Mises and Milton Friedman, and I'll mention Ayn Rand, and I've read their works.
Yeah. Well,
I'm
Milton
not one
Friedman,
of
I don't
these
like
people.
him. He's a monetarist.
Right, and I understand that, but he is one of the people within your circle of theorists of economists. Now,
Kind of, yes.
yeah, and I've read him. So, when you talk to some socialists or communists, they might not be familiar with the theory. I don't know what leftist theory you've read, but most of the time you guys have never read anything. But when we
Yes,
talk about the writing of those guys, those economic policies in the last 40 years have been implemented more and more in the United States and in the global north.
yes.
Okay. Neoliberal policies, free market policies. And
I don't agree.
the irony of that is that 40 years of these policies, we've seen the destruction of the working
Hmm.
class. We've seen
Can you
imperialism
name them?
increase. We've seen the destruction of the environment. And when you guys have gotten what you want for 40 years, you guys say, "Oh, that's not real capitalism."
No, I
Another
mean it's
point
really
that
simple.
another point that
Capitalism. Yes. I'm
one
sorry.
more
I'm sorry.
point I'm
I'm
going to make
interrupting
is
you.
one more point I'm going to make
Hmm.
is that when I wanted you to tell me that the worker is a commodity because um, there's a long history of slavery within capitalism.
Yes.
Uh, and it's a different kind of slavery. We'll have these religious, wacko Christian capitalist defenders talk
Hmm.
about the Bible and how there was slavery in the Bible and it was a different kind. I don't want to talk about that. Capitalism gained power by the transatlantic slave trade and the wealth accumulated by slave traders. And they accumulated so much power and wealth that they were able to join together and overthrow monarchies.
Hmm.
Now, how do we have so much slavery under capitalism. If capitalism is the voluntary exchange of goods and services.
Okay, hold on.
Well,
Now, there's several points there.
capitalism is a. Let me just say one more thing.
It's,
Capitalism is a system of the exchange of goods and services. Now, the worker becomes a good, and it's also a system of hierarchy. So, what happens is it's very easy to take one group and say, listen, this group is so low down on the hierarchy, they're not human.
why not
And
slave
you can
them?
you can create an entire society believing they're not human, they're not people. We can enslave them. We're actually doing them a favor. And we could still say we live in a capitalist system based on the fair exchange of goods and services, but they're not people. And we're seeing more dehumanization as time goes on. We're saying now, back again, these unskilled workers, they don't deserve to have a living wage. They don't deserve to have a shelter, food, all these things. And that's kind of some of the policies and ideas that I'm a critic of. So go on. I know I spoke a while.
Well, no, there's no problem. I love this discussion. I'm just trying to put my thoughts together. Number one was the liberal policies that the U.S. government implemented based on you. I'm gonna argue about that first, and then about slavery, specifically slavery. Okay, number one. I don't know what liberal policies you're talking about. In the United States, you pay
Neoliberal.
about 30 neoliberal. I don't know by what you mean by neoliberal, but I'm gonna defend my position, which is capitalism is free market, the free exchange of goods and services. You own your labor.
Okay.
In the United States, you have to pay more than 30% in taxes. So I don't see that as really capitalism, and it's been like that for several decades. You have a monetary monopoly. It is 100% illegal for you to create your own money. What people adopted.
Right.
You are forced to use the American dollar, which finances the government. Inflation is a form of taxation. Therefore, you're paying a non-legislated tax. From inflation in the United States goes anywhere from 1.8% to 5 something percent. But if you include commodities and houses, you can get numbers higher than 30 or 50% inflation a year. So I see tons of regulations and tons of taxation, and it's not like, oh, this just happened last year. It's been going on like this for decades and decades. The federal government became larger and larger. So I don't see those neoliberal policies that you're describing. So do you want to reply to that, or do you want me to respond the slavery thing?
I'll just say one more thing real quick. When I talk about neoliberal, it's there's another term for it is neoclassical.
Yeah.
Neoclassical economics, which I'm sure you seem like. Have you studied economics in college or university at all?
No.
Okay, so you would learn about that in any economics, macroeconomics class in the United States, and the policies that have been implemented for the past 40 years, pretty much since Reagan. Those policies were started in New York City, as a matter of fact, in the mid-1970s, where the United States, where New York was bankrupt, and they allowed Wall Street bankers and capitalists to rewrite the bylaws and the economic policies of New York City. And then that was adopted within the entire United States, and then it's gone throughout the rest of the Western world, where there has been a steady deregulation of capital and of the banks.
For example, during Reagan times.
More of a monopolization.
For example, during the Reagan times, Reagan, he is not a capitalist. Again, capitalism, free exchange of goods and services. Reagan increased the national debt, therefore forcing American people into debt. Reagan increased budgets in several areas. He increased taxes too. He decreased taxes, but what people don't talk about a lot is that later he increased them. So he actually violated tons of Austrian economists or free market principles. So his government wasn't a free market government. Just because he is friends with tons of businessmen who call themselves capitalists, and just because he lowered a little bit the taxes and deregulated this and that, doesn't delete the fact that he increased the size of government in several
But one of their biggest economic advisors were the Chicago Boys.
I don't agree with the Chicago Boys, but it doesn't matter. You can be my advisor and you're a socialist, but if I do things that are not socialist, that doesn't make me a socialist.
But
Doesn't
it
matter
did,
who their
and
advisors
they
are. You
followed the
should.
economic policies of the Chicago Boys.
Well, I don't support the Chicago Boys. In my opinion, they're really close to the Keynesians. You know, they believe in a central government taking care of certain aspects. That's why I support the
Hmm.
Austrian school, who believes in free market. So these examples that you're giving me about capitalism taking over are all related to the state, and the state functions on
Hmm.
coercion. So I would jump into slavery.
Okay.
Um, I'm not an expert in American history, so if I get something wrong, please feel free to correct me.
Sure.
But what freed the slaves in the North, because you have United States North and United States South, and the South wanted to secede. The South didn't want to secede only because of slavery, because let's be honest, like 95% of the population didn't own slaves in the South. They wanted to secede because they were paying tons of taxes, and those taxes were going mostly to the North. The government in the North was investing more heavily into the North than the South. So there was like a redistribution of wealth right there, and the South didn't like that. And of course, slavery. Tons of slaves owners, like a percentage of the population, low percentage, but 1%, when we're talking about slavery, 1% is 1% too much. Wanted to keep slavery because it was their business. Um, so that generated the Civil War. But here's a lot of data that people ignore. In the South, it's not like capitalism generated slavery, or in the North, because you had slavery in the North too. Why did the North got rid of slaves uh, like almost completely before making it illegal? Because it wasn't illegal during the entire Civil War. It was legal to own slaves in the North. It was still legal. So why did the North have less slaves than the South, even though it was legal in both places? It is really easy, because the North was more developed. The North had a capital structure more advanced than South, more capitalism, more companies. And when you have a really advanced economy, it becomes a better deal to have a worker than a slave, because a slave works the minimum as possible to keep himself alive because he's being forced to work. A worker
Hmm.
wants to accumulate wealth. He's having a wage. He gets a paycheck.
Hmm.
So there's competition there. The worker becomes an asset that you can't just take. The worker becomes an asset that you have to make happy. You have to, hey, here's a paycheck.
Hmm.
And my competition gives you
Yeah.
a worse salary. I'll give you a better salary. I'll give you more benefits. Come with me.
Hmm.
So the North was way more capitalism. It developed more. So that's what ultimately make protected the slaves, because slavery wasn't a good business deal. In Africa, there's slavery is illegal. But since the capital structure, by capital structure, I mean how advanced the economy is really low in Africa for several reasons. Slavery, sadly, slavery is a good business for a lot of people there. But here in the United States, you don't have tons of cops avoiding you getting slaves. I mean, slavery in the United States today is not a thing, not only because it's illegal, but because it's not a good
It's not a
business. If
thing.
you as far as I know, I mean, and of course, it's a country with 350 million people. I'm sure there's gotta be exceptions, but
There's
economically
slavery in
speaking,
the United States prison population,
yes,
the 14th Amendment
I
loophole.
agree with that. But let's take that out of the equation for a little bit, okay? Because there we're getting in another type of discussion. But there is no businesses out there kidnapping people, and the police tries to stop them because slavery is such a good business that they want to do that. No, it's a
Hmm.
better deal to hire a worker. Okay, so
Hmm.
that's what protects slaves in the South. Since the South was poorer, because the South was less developed, slavery was a better deal for them. That's number one.
Hmm.
Number two, a lot of capitalists in the South saw business opportunities with the slave. For example, they wanted to educate them. They wanted to give them private property rights, like, for example, a slave who managed to save money. doesn't matter how, wanting to buy a house or wanting to send his kids to school. They couldn't do that because the Confederation didn't allow it. They created first class and second class citizens.
Hmm.
Slaves were second class citizens. So the state, through coercion, through getting resources from the population, prohibited
Hmm.
slaves from naturally freeing themselves through progress and capital accumulation.
Right,
Okay,
right.
so I don't see the American government from the north as the good guys. I see the good
Hmm.
guys as economical development, and that's what you ultimately free the slaves and raise the standard of living for everyone.
So let me say a couple things. One
Yes.
thing that I would go back to if I were you was the idea that the North was industrialized at the time of the Civil War, and it was not.
More industrialized.
The Industrial Revolution began after that. There was a lot of
Hmm.
mineral extraction, resource extraction, and very rudimentary manufacturing. But the North and South, the South actually had a lot more wealth because of slavery. And then they had things like the Three-Fifths Compromise to give them more representation in government. Uh, Another thing I want to say is that you didn't really address the point of why we can have a system of slavery within a capitalist
Hmm.
hierarchical system. Now, another point that I'm going to make is that in the North, there was different kinds of slavery. You had something called company towns, which was all
Hmm.
throughout the North, especially Midwest, where people would be forced to work for a company and they would be paid in something called scrip. And scrip was a form of currency that you could only use for the company store and different stores that the company owned. And this was all throughout the country, that the company would pay you in this, and you were basically forced to live in the home of this company that this company owned, and you were owned by this company. It was a form of slavery. Um, Now we know that it's much more sleek and it's much more sophisticated, the form of slavery that is in the United States today, and that the United States prison population is the largest in the entire world, even per capita. Because when people say it's the largest in the world, the US has 350 million people,
Yes,
but
but
even per capita,
it's
and
something
and
created by
and
the state, even though these are
no,
private
but
prisons.
let me explain something to you. That the reason for this is because once again, the capitalist class, the corporations use the state as a tool of violence to incarcerate people to then work in the prisons for free for the profit of these companies. Now, I'm going to say one more thing, and I'm going to go back to US imperialism.
Hmm.
1865, the Civil War ends. Okay?
Hmm.
1895, US imperialism officially begins. That's a span of 30 years that there was no imperialism and no slavery, really. I mean, they were still genociding the Native American people, but
Hmm.
we're talking about using people for cheap or free labor. And
Hmm.
30 years later, the United States capitalists spoke with their shills in government and said, guys, we need to figure out how to use slaves again. And I think we should use the playbook that the Europeans have done for so many years. We can conquer these countries. We can create colonies and neo colonies. We can set up puppet fascist dictatorships. And the American people will never see it. And that's what they started to do. They created a system of banana republics through Latin America,
Hmm.
enslaved people like you and me.
Hmm.
And the American people didn't worry about it. And we have even people now, even people that live here now. I'll speak with for many of my Latino brothers and sisters who don't have any idea why their family left their country. Why did you leave? What was happening in your country when your family left? They don't know. Well, it was at the time of the fascist dictator that the United States installed
Hmm.
for American companies. And my point is,
Well,
and
your
an
audio cut off.
aspect of,
Your point is, can you repeat the part? Your
do
point
you hear me?
is,
Do you hear me?
now I hear you.
You hear me? Okay. Yeah, slavery is always going to be a part of capitalism because it requires infinite growth. And at some point, they're going to need to extract more wealth out of the labor of the worker. And they're going to
Well,
find a way to do it. They have to.
okay.
So
Here
the
there's two
state will work
fundamental
as a
problems.
proxy for the capitalist. One more thing, real quick. The state will act, and the state will be big, but it won't be big for. And when we talk about the size of the state will be big, but it will be big in terms of the
In
U.S.
terms of what?
military, in terms of service
The
to capital, not service of the people. When we talk
Mhm.
about size of government, we don't see the government increasing in size for services to the American people or to the citizen or to the working class. We have the biggest military in the world. We have subsidies going. We have subsidies going to countries. We have subsidies going to corporations, and
Mhm.
that is due to service of capital. We have
Well,
very little going to the actual working class,
yes,
even
but
compared to other
I believe
capitalist nations.
I believe that even though you and I have fundamental differences, our enemy is the same entity, the state. You have been complaining about the state in this entire conversation, and I'm
Right.
complaining about the state too. You know, you complain about the capitalist using the state. I'm complaining about the same thing, you know. And my solution, even though we can have fundamental disagreements, for example, in my opinion, the free exchange of goods and services, which is capitalism, doesn't require infinite growth. And in my opinion, even though it grows infinitely, infinite growth doesn't mean that you need more real resources and that you have to enslave people to finance that growth. We can have that disagreement, but we do agree on the fact that the state is used by the benefit of certain people. So my solution is really simple. If you have a smaller state, for example, the size of Liechtenstein or Monaco, Liechtenstein, really small states with jurisdiction over a couple thousand people, the size of a city, or maybe the size of a state like Texas, no bigger than that. The capacity that that state has to acquire soldiers, to acquire enough resources to go and invade, to go and use coercion over innocent people is really small. And if you have more states competing with each other, the chances of some states collaborating with each other to stop that evil state from attacking them increase a lot. You know, um, um, for example, France was invaded by Germany. Imagine if France would have been the size of half of Europe, for example,
Mm-hmm.
and Germany would have invaded them. They overtake the government and they're screwed. But because France was relatively small and there was other states in the game, those other states could take over and beat the Germans. So we agree
Mm-hmm.
decentralization is what ultimately beat the evil state of the Nazi regime. So why not having more decentralization? We both agree on that. You know, even though we disagree fundamentally on certain things, we do agree on the solution, right?
I agree that the solution ultimately would be a stateless society.
Oh, I agree. Now it's getting interesting, but we agree that we can't just abolish the state out of nowhere tomorrow, but
No.
cutting it down in pieces, making it more decentralized, you know, more independent. Um,
But
is the better thing.
what is the critique of the idea of creating a
Yes,
bunch of different states? Because if we look at
nationalism.
history, well, not just nationalism, but let's look at European history as it is. And the now, in the past 50 years, we've had less war, but Europe historically, for hundreds of years, has experienced more war than any other part of the world due to all these tiny nations fighting for resources and for land. So one of the risks that would happen out of dividing the United States up in all these different ways would
Mm-hmm.
be a lot more violence possibly between all these different states.
No,
And
I
that's
don't agree with that.
that was kind of my that was kind of my message in the beginning that if this state believes that, that state believes that. I wish that we could have this socialist, Ancapistan, as you guys like to call it, and Ankamistan, as other people like to call it. But unfortunately, Ankamistan has oil and gold and copper and lithium, and Kapistan just formed a state because they had no way to enforce their power and wealth over the people of Ancapistan. So they formed a state. They tried a stateless society. They formed a state, and
Mm-hmm.
now that state is being used against Ankamistan to extract their resources. And Ankamistan didn't have a state. They didn't have a military because they just thought Ancapistan would
Well,
respect the non-aggression principle. And as
no,
we
no, 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 no.
understand
In
that
ANCAP society, one second.
as we know, as we know that when we have
Hold
a
on.
system based on violence and based on coercion, we can't really have a non-aggression principle.
No, hold on. First of all, I don't defend the non-aggression principle like a religion, like some, for example, voluntarists do. Voluntarists are like anarcho-capitalists, but they believe that the non-aggression principle is a like must. You always have to respect it. I don't believe in that. In my opinion, the non-aggression principle is something that will most likely be respected in a free market society. But there's exceptions all the time, and it depends. It's a cost benefit. For example, if you're in an island in an airplane, and we both crash, and you are asleep, and I take all the resources in the island, and then when you wake up, I'm like, you gotta eat sand if you want my resources because they're mine because I took them while you were sleeping. You're gonna if you want to respect the non-aggression principle, you can't take the food from me because it's mine. It's
Mm-hmm.
rightfully mine because I took it and I put
It's
it
a
in a
very good
site.
criticism of your ideology of anarcho-capitalism.
No, no, no. That's a criticism of voluntarism. Voluntarism. Anarcho-capitalists believe that the non-aggression principle is something that probably the chances of respecting it are higher on under a libertarian society. But of course, there's exceptions. So you will be like, okay, I'm gonna do a cost benefit. Okay, I'm pretty big. You look bigger than me. You punch me in the face, and you take the food. But maybe you're smaller. You're gonna have to eat the sand if you want food from me. So you're gonna do a cost benefit calculation in the back of your mind and come out with a conclusion. That's it. And that conclusion might respect or disrespect the non-aggression principle. That's it. What we believe is that in a free market society, the chances of you respecting the non-aggression principle are way higher because in a state society, a government can like war is expensive, okay? Because you spend a lot of resources, it's just a mess. But since the government doesn't have a limit in their budget because they can just tax you, they can just imprint money, okay? War becomes a more realistic solution for them. It's an easier
Mm-hmm.
solution to solve conflicts. Therefore, the
Right.
chances of violating the non-aggressive principle are higher in a state society. In a stateless society,
Okay.
you will have private sector security entities. And if they have tanks, guns, and
Private
everything,
security.
yes, it comes from voluntary payments. The consumers fund that. Therefore, if they go to war, it's expensive. They're literally eating it from their savings. So
Mm-mm-mm.
they're gonna be really
Now,
careful if they start a conflict.
now this private security and what if someone doesn't pay? What if someone is too poor to pay for the private security?
Excellent, excellent question. Well, what happens in a state society if someone is too poor? Well, you tax everyone, so you fund the police, and the police helps the poor
Mm-hmm.
person. It's a pretty simple business model. Now,
Mm-hmm.
we have a system of private entities that compete with each other to
Mm-hmm.
protect the public. Several have
Oh my
different
God,
values.
this is crazy.
Yes, it's like it's pretty good. Rothbard explains this really well.
And there is
Also,
no rule of law.
yes, there is rule of law. There is a lot of laws and regulations. Laws and regulations
And
are
who
basically
enforces the law in an anarcho-capitalist stateless society? The person with the
Mhm.
most wealth and power?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. Laws are like products and services. Okay, we agree that Apple is the most powerful company in the world, but that doesn't mean that you're not gonna buy a Samsung. You decide what product to consume. Okay, That's the bargaining power of negotiation. What happens? You have tons of consumers, and let's say the majority of the consumers believe in the capital punishment. They want to kill someone who kills an innocent person. So they have a
Right.
company, and that company protects them, offers law services and justice services. And they guarantee that if one of their clients gets killed by someone, that person is going to die. Now, let's say that there's another company, and this company is against the capital punishment, okay? And this company believes in that if you kill someone, you go to jail for life. That's it. Now, what happens if two clients, okay,
This is very feudalistic.
one client
And you
kills.
understand that that's one critique of anarcho-capitalists is that you guys are just neo-feudalists.
Um, can you explain?
Feudalism is a system in which people were given land and protection by people of higher rank.
Oh, no different from what we have
No,
right
when
now.
you talk, I'm talking about the feudalist society, what we call the Dark Ages or the Middle Ages,
Yes.
where the wealthy landowners also had their private armies, and their private
don't agree.
armies would fight against each other.
No, not
And
necessarily.
what you're talking about happened.
Yes,
This occurred.
because war was a cheaper option in the past. Okay, today going to war is expensive. It's not a good option. If we
Not
disagree on something,
necessarily.
for example, you have a private neighborhood and I have my private neighborhood, and I play music too loud, late, and you don't like that because you're right beside me, we can solve it going to war. We can fight. That's one option. Violence is one way of solving conflict. Okay? Now, we know that's expensive. We're going to lose tenants. Okay? A lot of people are going to leave. It's a mess. They're going to go to a peaceful and cheaper option. Okay? Because war is expensive. We're
Okay,
going to charge.
let me ask you a question real quick.
Yes.
So the owner of the largest private police department company is committing horrible crimes.
Yeah, what if they
He
become the
owns it.
state?
He's the owner of this police department. Let's say he also owns all the land,
Yes.
okay? Because he
Well,
bought
that
it.
would be a hard situation to come by, but yes.
Well, no, it wouldn't be because under capitalism, power continues to be consolidated, and that's what we see. So it's not a hard. It would happen eventually, guaranteed.
Well,
What would
not
the
really.
people? What power would the people have against the landowner slash police owner against him?
Well, excellent question. But first, I'm going to address the myth that under a capitalist system, uh, more real resources like land and commodities fall into fewer hands. That's not true. If you see countries with more free market, there's no anarcho-capitalist country out there, but we do agree that there is countries with more free market than others. For example, if you see Argentina, the percentage of people who own houses is smaller. Cars, commodities is smaller. In Argentina, the top 10, top 5 owns everything. Here in the United States, those numbers look way, way better. Same
Why is
in
that in
Europe.
Latin America? Because Latin America and Argentina was a fascist dictatorship even during the Cold War of the United States.
Yes, but
It
that
was a
ended a long time ago.
Yeah, but the vestiges of it still happen, right?
It
It
changed a
doesn't
lot, and
change right away.
the
And
government started correcting.
it's not just laws, it's also culture. And being colonized for so many years. I know that colonized people in the Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico. It's the same
Okay,
thing.
yes.
Why are poor countries that are rich in natural resources? Why do these countries still stay poor?
Well, but
Because
they're
they're
being
still
attacked.
neo-colonies. How did the Argentinian Navy get in debt to United States banks? I mean,
Well, because
we have to understand that under capitalism and the United
but what's
States is the
capitalist
global
about
center.
that? You're naming an institution which is the American government that funded itself through coercion, through taxation.
But the United States government works for capitalist powers, and when the Argentinian Navy was in debt to banks, not the United States, banks on Wall Street, that was also a part of neocolonialism. And
I
that's what
agree
happens
with
all
you.
through Latin
I agree
America.
with you. Crony capitalists, as I call them, you just call them capitalists. In my opinion, we are
Yeah.
all capitalists. But just for the sake of the argument, stick with me on this. Crony capitalists. Capitalists that use the government for their own personal benefit. We agree. We both agree that that's terrible. Okay, so the problem is the fact that they can do it. Imagine complaining about a person who loves sugar, okay, and goes to eat tons of cakes and everything, okay? And you tell him, don't eat the cake. You put a cake on the table every day. You put
Oh
a
shit!
delicious
Hold
cake.
on a second.
Oh, you put a filter. Okay, there we
Okay,
go.
I'm back.
Imagine telling a person who loves sugar and it's got a weight problem, don't eat the cake, and you cook him a delicious cake every day and you put it in front of the table and you be like, don't eat the cake, and you have to sit on the table and look at the cake, but don't eat it. It's terrible. Okay.
Right.
So that's what a crony capitalist is. You're like, okay, you crony capitalist, here there's a beautiful state with unlimited resources because it has the right to get to tax people and print money and just fund itself to the infinity, and beyond. Okay, don't abuse of it. Can we blame them? Of course, I
Yeah.
blame them. They're terrible people, but at the same time, I have to use my brain and understand that the source of the problem is that such an institution exists in the first place.
Right. Let me say a few things,
Yes.
and then I might need to get off or speak with someone else.
Sure.
There's a guy been waiting 46 minutes. I don't even know if
Oh,
he's
I'm
still on or
sorry. I'm
not.
sorry. I came
No,
here
that's
and I
fine because I've enjoyed the
took over the entire
conversation.
thing.
No, it's cool because there are people I get on and off because they don't know anything, and this is interesting even though we agree on some things and we disagree on others. But um, there are a couple terms that make me think of the difference between where you're coming from and where I'm coming from. And there's the terms of idealism versus materialism. Okay. And us on the left, us socialists, communists, we are materialists. Okay. We analyze history and the material conditions of history very, very thoroughly. Okay. We go through the entire culture, the hierarchies created, and we analyze that to build a current condition and a future that will work better for all of us. Okay. And when we think of idealism, we think, first of all, that history is not based on the material conditions and the conflicts that society was living in, but a history of ideas. And also, currently, idealism, we don't look at the past history of the different ideas that people have advocated for and what were the results. Now, when I look at the history of what you propose, when you say there's never been an anarcho-capitalist society, there has been, and the closest thing to that would be what we call the Middle Ages, because there were not states as we know them now.
But
We
they did
had,
have the structures of states through coercion. In the Middle Ages, you did have authorities that had a coercive right to over their people to take their resources.
well,
Anarcho-capitalism, yes,
but what I'm saying is that we can see throughout history what happens when we have a stateless society, but we still have a system of coercion and exploitation and the building of wealth. Okay.
yes.
And what
Well, here's
happens
the thing.
is, and hold on. And
I'm sorry.
what we see is wealth accumulates and wealth consolidates between different people. And your analogy of the two people who crashed on an island, one guy was asleep, one guy was not. That analogy is very true. And to go back to the past 40 years and the implementation of Mises and Milton Friedman and Hayek and all those policies after we left Keynesian economics and we went into neoclassical economics and the implementation of a lot of the policies that you advocate for, what we see
Can you name
is
one?
that we're talking about deregulation. I'll talk to you about one. There was a policy and there was a law in the United States that corporations had to stay by a certain size. Okay. And every city had their own stores. You go to this city and they have those stores, and you go to that city. This city has totally different stores. Okay. And that was believed that was restricting freedom. Okay. And along with that, we had manufacturing. And those manufacturers were incentivized to stay here. Okay. So we deregulated everything. Manufacturing left. And what we started to see was the monopolization of retail. So all the stores that I grew up with are gone. Okay. All when I was young, all these department stores and all these other stores are gone. And now we are seeing Walmart, Kmart, all stores like that, big box stores. And then
Yes.
on top of that, now we have Amazon, which is a larger monopoly that is putting all those stores out of business. Now you walk down the street in a shopping district, you see closed store after closed store after closed store. That is a result of deregulation and the idea that the market will regulate itself.
Yes. No.
And what
Can
we're
I
seeing
reply to that
also,
because
what we're
can I
seeing
reply to that?
also, yeah. So what we're also seeing is the continuation of U.S. imperialism. That didn't end.
Okay, let me
We're
reply to
seeing,
that because
hold on,
if not, it gets more complicated.
one more quick thing.
Okay.
One more quick thing. We're seeing the stagnation of wages in the past 40 years, working conditions
Yes.
that are getting worse. Union membership is dropping. And once again, when you talk about the state getting big, it's not for the people. If anything, service to the people and what we call welfare policies and all those things are getting worse. One more thing is that until Ronald Reagan, health insurance companies had to be
That's why
nonprofit
capital.
organizations. Okay? They had to be nonprofit organizations.
Well,
Okay? And that healthcare costs much lower. But what the capitalists lobbied the government to do is say, let us be for profit and we will provide an even better product. And what has happened is the United States quality of healthcare in the past 40 years has gotten worse and has become more expensive.
well, okay, I'm gonna reply to this. You are 100% correct in everything that you said. We're just disagreeing in semantics. You're saying capitalism. I say chronic capitalism. You give me an example of Amazon, okay? You're like, oh, deregulation is what caused Walmart and Amazon and all these companies to take over. Deregulation, no. Deregulation for them, you didn't have true deregulation in the market. What you had there was deregulation for some selected players, okay? For example, Amazon or Walmart, they don't pay property taxes in several areas. So Amazon didn't pay sales tax for a long time. These companies also can take on artificial high debt coming directly from banks that are allowed to create money out of nowhere, out of thin air. In fact, there is some estimations that show that $1 coming from a big corporation can leverage itself up to 70 something dollars. On the other hand, you and me, if we go to the bank and we get a loan, we have to put the principal, and at best, they will give us 5 times the amount of money. So imagine 5 times versus 70 something times. We're not playing with the same rules. So it's not the regulation, it's the regulation for them. It's better rules for them. So it's not true deregulation. What I'm asking for
But it is truly deregulation.
How come if they're using a coercive institution, they have the government, which let's see the government for 1 second as a bully. And that bully is getting money from you. You know, you have to pay your property taxes. You have to pay your sales taxes.
I'll explain to you in 1 minute. So
but 1 second, but I don't have to pay those property taxes. I don't have to pay those sales taxes. So who's going to succeed and grow more? Of course, me. So that's unfair. So it's deregulation for me, is anarcho-capitalism for me, but it's statism for you. So that's the problem.
Yeah, I'll explain it very quickly for you. Now, if you read Vladimir Lenin's book, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, he discusses this and how this happened over 100 years ago. Okay, so this is nothing new. This is cyclical within capitalism. Now, the most powerful people in a capitalist society in a capitalist country will be able to use the state to wield their power and authority. Now, that won't just be monopolies, that will also be cartels. And when I speak about cartels, a lot of Americans don't know what a cartel is. A cartel is not just a drug cartel, it's a group of companies that will band together to hold their power and to use their power against smaller companies. And almost every industry, if they're not ruled by a monopoly, it's a group of cartels. And they will prevent smaller companies from coming up. And that happens every day. And those cartels or those monopolies will use this.
Oh, wait one second. Can you repeat that?
Right. That's why the smaller, the larger companies, the cartels or the monopolies, will have the money and the power and the influence. Those larger companies, do you know how many Facebook people and Google employees and Amazon employees work in government and they go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth? Tons. And the fact is that the government will work for them and they will deregulate them, but that's only an aspect of capitalism, a natural aspect of capitalism, not crony capitalism or anything else. And these are the cycles that capitalism has always made.
Okay, well, I think we can finish the discussion here, but I would say I just don't see how that's capitalism and not crony capitalism if over and over again is people using the government for their own benefit. It's again using an institution based on coercion. We're not seeing these companies just winning in the market because their goods and services are so good. Okay, of course I'm going to admit that Amazon and Walmart are amazing. They offer a lot of development. Okay, we're criticizing certain things, that they just take over using the state and getting these tax benefits and this artificial high funding. And while we have to play by the normal rules and pay all the taxes, and we can't afford a huge group of lawyers who can give us tons of tax cuts, and we play by other rules and they play by other rules, and that's thanks to the state. If it wasn't because of the state, it doesn't matter how big they are, the rules would be pretty much the same. They will be richer than us, but that's it. The consumer will have the problem. We don't have the power because we are forced to pay for their own benefit. Amazon, for example, yes.
Go on. No, go on.
Amazon, for example, works directly for the FBI. They offer the service. So just think about this. You go to work. You got to pay your taxes. You, against your own will, you're paying for the government to hire Amazon. When Amazon doesn't pay their taxes, you have to compensate and pay for those taxes. So the solution for me is not like, raise the taxes for Amazon. No, create standard rules. And in my opinion, the best way to create standard rules is to create decentralization of government, because you and me, we don't agree on what the rules are. Those standard rules, we don't agree with what they should be. So why don't you just make your own, and I make my own rules? We live in different societies, and we will be living in peace. So what I want to say here is that we should be talking about secession more often, because it's a real solution.
So one more thing I want to say is that, for me, I also want to build a stateless society, but that would be built on a state with a democratically run economy, where the working class owns the means of production, the state runs to serve people's needs. The state is a tool to meet people's basic needs for housing, healthcare, education, clean water, clean air. That is the role of the state. The state would also work to prevent reactionary movements from inside and out. And that movement would build inside the state, and then it would aid in other movements like that internationally. Kind of the way Cuba did, where when South Africa was fighting against apartheid, Cuba sent advisors to the South African movement to end apartheid. See, it's very different from U.S. imperialism, when the small, tiny nation of Cuba sent
Hmm.
advisors to those fighting apartheid to give freedom. They did the same in Angola. So
Hmm.
you have to see that historically, uh, socialism doesn't just barrel through societies conquering and oppressing. They will find oppressed people and oppressed groups and help them.
Well, I don't agree with that statement.
Let
Oh,
me
oh,
let
I'm
me
sorry, your
finish.
audio cut off.
And yeah, and they did the same thing in Latin America. So that would be ultimately the goal, that we would see a growth of socialism, and that would have to be once the U.S. was not invading and attacking any society that attempts to build it. A country can build socialism without being under a David and Goliath situation. And as that happened, we can break down borders, we can continue to take away class, and we would actually build a stateless, classless society.
Yes. Well, I don't agree with what you just said about socialism, just helping those who are unfortunate and all that. But that's fine. In my opinion, you should try what you're not able to try. You're complaining about the U.S. government stopping any true legitimate tries of a socialist government developing the economy and a society. So, in my opinion, you should be able to do it freely without anyone through coercion
Yeah.
stopping you. Okay, but same way you do the rest for us. So in my opinion, we should completely delete from our minds that Washington out of nowhere they're gonna be like, oh yes, if California wants to be socialist, they don't need to secede. We're just gonna let them.
Mhm.
That ain't gonna happen. You know, they
Do
still
you,
have a
would you identify as an anti-imperialist, anarcho-capitalist?
may. Well, if in empire you mean a state, imperialist, by that you mean a government using coercion to take over other states. Yes, I'm an anti-imperialist, of course. Yes.
That's great.
Um, yes, I mean we agree way more than what you believe. We just disagree on how we will build
Yeah.
our house. I
Hmm.
will build an
The
apartment
only
like
issue
this,
is
and
that capitalism at some point would require imperialism.
I don't agree with that. But let's assume that that's true. For 1 second, let's assume that is true. Imagine that my country is the size of the United States and is capitalist. You will have way more power to expand and use violence and coercion to attack other nations. Now, if we agree
Okay.
on secession and my country is the size of Austin, Texas, I have way less jurisdiction to use coercion and impose my capitalist power on you. So
Hmm.
even if you're right about capitalism taking over other societies, your best friend is secession because it takes a lot of power away from me. If that's the truth, if it's true that eventually I will have to
Hmm.
invade you because I'm a capitalist and I'm like, oh, I want to keep expanding. I have to go and attack him. It would be way easier for me to attack him if I have
Hmm.
jurisdiction over tons of cities and I can just force
Hmm.
people into join an army and just go and invade you. But
Yeah.
if I just have jurisdiction over one city, what can I do?
Hmm.
Not much,
Cool.
you know.
Well,
So
with
that's
that, I'm going to end it with you. I want to thank you so much. I don't know how long we were on,
oh
but
wow, that
yeah,
was
but
good.
look fantastic. And if you see me on again, I would love to pick it up at some point.
Sure, follow me
Debating
back.
ANCAPs libertarians is a guilty pleasure of mine. And I put liberals on here because I'm trying to avoid these Trump supporters, these these idiots. You know what I'm saying? I'm sorry to put it in any other way, but I don't see there any positive outcome in debating one of these ultra nationalist Trump supporters. As it is, debating is performative. I'm not really trying to change your mind. You're not trying to change my mind. If we see where we're coming from and I change your mind and that's great. But
Hmm.
we don't go into it with the idea that I want to we're doing it more for the performative aspect of it, and I don't think there's any benefit of speaking with any of these flag waving ultra nationalists. The conversation just descends into nonsense, and conspiracy theories, and it's just absurd. So I all the way say, liberals and caps libertarians, you guys definitely more than welcome to jump on, and I
Well, that's
appreciate it.
awesome. Okay.
All right.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. All right, guys, I'm going to jump off. I've been on for quite a while. I'm sorry I didn't get to everyone, but I will see you all later.